to make effective use of both synchronous and asynchronous approaches for instruction in inclusive teaching. And this third bullet is to access a network of higher educators examining ways to provide inclusive online learning, hopefully at AU through formal activities and opportunities like this one through CTRL, as well as ongoing informal opportunities as we traverse this online experience together in higher education.
We also thought we'd introduce ourselves, so I'll start. But there's 4 of us presenting today, and we had a really good time putting together this session, so we hope you have a good time spending time with us. So my name is Sarah Irvine-Belson. I'm for Innovation in Education. I've been here at AU 25 years. Alita.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here today, and thanks so much to the panel for working together. I've been at AU since 2009, and I'm an associate professor in the School of Education in Special Education.
Sorry, Robin, you're on mute.
Mute. Okay, can you hear me fine now?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Ashley. My name is Robin Adams. I am one of the directors in the Center for Diversity and Inclusion. I specifically focus, much of my work is focused around our co-curriculars in education and training modules for the campus. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm really happy to be here with this team today and all of you. It's always, you know, in this format, it's always great to see faces and be able to engage in a conversation with colleagues. So thank you for being here with us.
And hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Rosendahl. My pronouns are she, her. I am the Director of Student Success and Student Athlete Support. So I oversee our academic support through the lens of academic coaching, which I'll talk a little bit more about today. I also oversee our Student Athlete Support Program. So I'm sure many of you have heard from me over the years. And today is actually my 13th anniversary at AU. So nice for it all to, you know, coincide in this moment. But I've really enjoyed my years here at American University.
That's awesome. And I think I actually forgot to say how long I've been here. Been around a long, not as long as Sarah, but I would say probably approaching my 19th year here at AU. And I'm also an AU alum. So we wanted to start much of this conversation, or start this conversation by engaging in a little self-reflection and a little discussion or participation around how do we define an inclusive online environment? Specifically, how do we define inclusion? So if you would use your chat box and, you know, give us a few words or phrase in response to this question. The other questions are more self-reflecting kinds of questions that we would like for you to engage in today, some of which we will go into a deeper dive and discussion with, and others are just things for us to consider. So that as we prepare for the classroom, how do we know who our students are? How do we truly are able to create spaces for students where they fully engage, you know, in their identities, and how do students own those identities in classroom spaces, and that they are self-defining who they are in our classrooms in ways that really support their learning, and how do we, and what unconscious biases do we hold, and can we really be vulnerable and own our own, and own the ways by which we feel inadequate in the classroom, especially as we talk about some very complicated concepts around inclusion and identity, and how do we really know our students and where those intersections are, and what does it look like when they look like us, but when they don't look like us, and all these dynamics that play out in our classroom. And also, how do we move from transactional to transformational kinds of of interactions in the classroom and learning. And so what we really want to sort of focus on here is, starting to think about these things as we're preparing will also guide your design and and the ways that you structure your classroom, along with much of the content we'll talk about today. And the last thing I'll say is that, we talk, and I've heard a number of conversations around surveys. So we talk about surveys as a way to get to know our students. And what we'll talk about today is that it is much more than just surveys that will allow for an inclusive classrooms. So that's a great first step, but it has to be met with an arsenal of tools that go along with that.
Yeah, and I think that this semester is also unique in that students are learning a new side of their own identity as they navigate their identity as learners through the online space. That over the years they've developed, how they learn, how they study, but in most cases through the lens of an in-person classroom. And so I think there's this uniqueness, building off of the spring semester, but there is a side to each student's identity that is really being developed now for the first time.
Thank you, Ashley and Robin. So I wanted to keep the conversation going about what we mean by inclusiveness and continue the discussion relative to what is it that our students bring to the classroom. So I thought I would take time and share with you, this is a theory or an idea, a concept from a guy named Sean Robinson. And I had the opportunity to speak with Sean last week. He's a researcher that studies the experiences of Black boys with dyslexia. But I thought that for our session, you would be particularly interested in how he sort of frames what identity is and how our identity comes to the social context of what we're dealing with today. The environment, the sociological model that we're living in, or world that we're living in, because we're living online. So Sean, first of all, kind of frames the overall social ecological model in terms of the different types of capital that different individuals would bring to any space, and in our case, the online learning space. Obviously, some of us have more or less navigational capital. They are able to function and work in these environments more easily or more comfortably than others, because their internet connection is unstable at any given moment, or because we have a background that we're comfortable living in, or we're just comfortable in the Zoom environment. We also obviously have social capital, and I know many of the folks on this this call have had a conversation with me before about what social capital our students bring to the classroom. We also have this idea that our students come to the classroom open and willing to learn, and that's their aspirational capital. They come in and they're eager to transform their identity by the experiences that they're having in the classroom. And then on the other side of that, they have their resistance capital. We all want to hold on to our identity and not lose track of who we are. And so again, that's the kind of overall ecological model that we're living in. Within that, we each bring different parts of our identities. And again, Sean uses this word Lebenswelt. Sorry, Angela, or anybody else who knows how to speak German better than I can. But this idea of this life world that we have, and we exist within it, and it exists within the environment. And obviously, Sean's work talks about his own experience as a Black man with dyslexia, his own giftedness, and how those things came together to have him understood who he is. And again, sometimes there was, for our students with dyslexia, often students who have difficulty with the processes of reading and becoming fluent readers often have gifted areas in other places. So we have that hidden talents and misunderstood understandings of our students and our students' understandings of themselves. Between race and giftedness, we often don't think of our different racial perspectives through the same lens of giftedness as we might think of each other. So that's an area where, again, there's that mismatch and that struggle. And then finally, between race and dyslexia. I'm sure some of you know, Ana Lydia and I spent a lot of time studying the fact that we have overrepresentation of minority students in some areas of disability, but not in dyslexia. And because dyslexia is sort of seen as more of a privileged disability, but it's an interesting term. So again, the point here was to really have you all think about who is it that our students come, who they come to, but also within this framework of what are we creating for them as an environment where they actually get to test out their identity and reframe their identity and share with us in an open way what they're doing when we come into the classroom. So I'm going to hand it over to Alita to talk a little bit more about what we're doing as instructors.
Thank you, Sarah. So originally we had this termed, it's not about you. We thought of these ideas around our opportunity to engage in the inclusive online teaching especially when it becomes complex and messy. And as a faculty, we bring our identities into the classroom as well. And also the social and cultural context, our attitudes, and particularly now in the online space, our own sense of efficacy as teachers. And for lots of us, I'll speak for myself, teaching and living in our current world has changed my sense of efficacy, and also the social and cultural context of what construes a classroom from our experiences. It certainly is disruptive, and it's also a chance for us to think about the purpose of our classrooms and how we make them the most accessible for our students, and the experiences that they have in our classes through the lenses of their identities and the context that's going to help broaden and deepen their understandings and their engagement with the materials that we're presenting. So I thought it would be a good opportunity at this point for us to go back to the chat. And there were some incredibly insightful definitions of inclusion: community, welcoming, accepting, valued, everyone is valued, engaging everyone. One that really addresses the complexity and the messiness is moving past our own inclinations and discomforts. So particularly when we are finding that we're challenged as individuals, as ourselves, that really drawing upon that idea and trying to open it up to include everyone. The other one was full membership. So I thought those were very, very insightful. I'm not sure if I'm just checking the chat again. Okay. So one of the bullets that we put on here as well is critically and continuously interrogating how and what we are teaching. So that the idea of really thinking about moving past our own discomforts and inclinations and trying to best open up our classrooms to make them fully welcoming. I really appreciate the idea of full membership as a definition of inclusion.
So, and I think what's great about that, and thank you all for the sharing, it sets us up to really talk about, okay, so there's a lot there. There's a lot of dynamics when we think about the classroom, the learners, us as faculty, instructors, the environment, the things that are seen and unseen that are coming into the classroom that we have with those experiences, that is a great tapestry of who we are as whole people. And so along that line, we recognize that we call it a bit of a tightrope that we're looking at. You know, for those of us who have watched tightrope walkers walk across this tightrope with grace, but sometimes terror, as they seek to have balance around their movement. And so we're using this as a metaphor to really talk about this preparation that may feel a little bit of a tightrope for some. And I think I would gamble to say that if you're feeling that tightrope, then you're doing it correctly, because that preparation really is about that balance. And so we wanted to sort of just call to your attention a couple of things here as you think about this. Is One is that there is a great deal of preparation and practice, as we know, that is required to get ready, to be ready, to be nimble, to be flexible, and to really deliver not just our subject expertise, but also to deliver classrooms that are inclusive and really where our students thrive, and really where that we can connect their learning, their hearts, and their interests. You know, they all align in this one place called our classroom and their lives. So, and so one of the things about that is that it can be a tricky thing. But one of the things we wanted to stress is that though the classroom is a place where learning and practice happens for all of us, the students as well as ourselves, is that learning can't happen on the backs of our students. It can't be that our practice really is about fulfilling a need for us in that, versus that learning and practice is happening around the content by which we're studying. So this graphic here really focuses us on the ideas of what are those components that we need to think about in this tightrope that's also going to provide a guide for us. And so you'll see here that it amongst the, you know, the arrows, so to speak, which we'll just call it a bit of a tightrope, the things that will allow us to really balance and flex or loosen this tightrope are some of these areas and the course content themselves. So establishing or these areas that will form the course content, establishing clear outcomes, anticipating learner variability, you know, in this, design assessments, design instructional experience, and deliver and reflect. And so it's a bit, even though this is an arrow and we're using the metaphor of tightrope, it's, you know, what the end of the arrow speaks to is that, you know, this will be a circular process and you'll be doing this continuously. And so that the content, the course content itself and the reflection pieces and the feedback that you'll get from students will really decide, you know, sort of how you move on this tightrope and in what ways you may loosen it up or tighten it up to really ensure that the classroom is a place where our students are really thriving around the learning.
And I love this visual. On Tuesday, we had the honor of hosting an online learning summit for faculty and staff across campus. And during that, we had a student panel. And one thing we heard loud and clear from the students is just how much they appreciate the flexibility that faculty provide, as you know, as we've all seen in the past 6 months how the elements have changed. So I love this visual of a tightrope, but knowing that sometimes the ground is 6 feet below us and other times it's 3 feet or 100 feet. And, you know, students, especially as we move into the next semester, that it's going to ebb and flow. That there may be changes to the university, though obviously we hope that we're on solid ground there, and, you know, but there may be changes to an instructor, changes to a student situation, changes to connectivity, that there will be changes. And I think we've all experienced that over the past 6 months. But I think as we establish our classrooms, also having that grace and understanding that things are going to change and could change. And you know, as Robin shared, just that this does go full circle. Thus, based on the elements changing, we may need to go back to our outcomes. We may need to go back to anticipating the variables.
So how do we do this? Well, we are presenting on universal design as a framework, and we've discussed it among our groups as one of the important points to note about UDL is it's focused on the environment. It's not focused on the individual. And so this idea of inclusion and UDL are very well integrated and married. Also, the UDL principles apply both to the format of the course as well as the content that we've been talking about, how our students engage with the content and how identities intersect the content. We also discussed this idea of our roles as instructors as promoting inclusion through our classroom spaces being safe. And I think back to Robin's point about our role as instructors in maintaining and managing our inclusive learning space for our students and understanding what our needs are separate from that space, which ensures it being a safe space. And the fourth point is that when we're struggling this year, as I imagine we will be, that we know how to get support, and not only through our campus communities and our departments resources, but also through our national network, CAST, and there are many UDL related resources that we're going to talk about as well.
So in establishing that framework, I like to take some time just to talk about creating a space for academic wellness. One of the areas that I have the pleasure of working with is our academic coaching team at the university, and that team of staff focuses on working with students to develop academic skills. So that is available to all AU students. It is available to undergraduates and graduates, but I wanted to take a moment to share some of what we're hearing from students, some of the needs that students have expressed over the past 6 months, and really some of the strategies that can be implemented into the design of a course to create an environment that's inclusive of all learners. So focusing first on access, we have seen connectivity issues that students have disclosed to us, whether it's through changes to their Wi-Fi or internet access, or, for example, in the Midwest, there were really bad storms this week, and thus, students losing power. So being able to give students alternative ways to submit assignments due to connectivity issues. Being able to give students alternative formats. So whether it's, if the preference is a Word document, but maybe they submit through a PDF, or, being able to submit documents through their phone, keeping in mind that not all are going to have access to a computer at all times. And then being able to have access to online course materials in advance of classes. So having access to materials that they can read on their phone, they can read on their computer. We have had students that have disclosed to us as of late that concerns over their ability to access printed material. And so being able to have materials that are online and are accessible through their computer or phone, give them the ability to use a screen reader, give them the ability to use different audio formats that they could listen to their text. So access has been a concern for students, and I know for faculty as well. I do want to take a moment to share that if you do have students that have connectivity issues, concerns over their access and ability to use different computer programs, the university has set up a tech task force. Whether it's the student or the faculty or the staff member, anyone can email techtaskforce@american.edu. They can disclose what their needs and their concerns are, and then there is a team of 5 team members that are going to be reviewing all of those needs and then coming up with creative solutions. So I think making sure students are aware of this email address, each faculty on this call, this will be important over the course of the semester. The next area is in course management. So course management, through executive function, students are having to navigate, they've always had to navigate 5 or 6 classes, but there's the unique needs of online learning in that each class is going to be in a different modality. Some professors are going to have required discussion boards, some are going to have required small groups, and their schedule is not going to just be a Monday, Thursday class, Tuesday, Friday class schedule. It's going to be a class that meets on Monday, Thursdays, but then has discussion boards due Wednesday, Sunday. And when you start to magnify that over 6 courses, you can imagine it becomes a lot for a student to manage their courses. And then keeping in mind that students are most likely away from campus, managing other responsibilities. So one thing that we have found to be really helpful through the inclusive design of this is to create course calendars. So students know exactly what they need within a week and really establishing clear expectations and understanding of what they need to do for the week ahead. Also providing students early access to materials. We have students that for their learning, they need the ability to be able to see and read and understand something before they attend a lecture. So we've seen great success for students where faculty are adding the PowerPoints to Blackboard or Canvas early. They're adding their notes and making their notes of the lecture accessible to all students. Also putting up class recordings. I know there's some sensitivity here with class recordings, but a student's ability to go back to a recording at a later time helps them as a learner in their academic success because they can slow it down, they can pause it, they can take the time for what they need to be able to truly learn in that class space. And then the last two things is really just as we approach our classes, being able to slow down a bit, especially in the first 2 weeks. We find in the realm of academic success that the first 2 to 4 weeks are pivotal in a student's ability to be successful in a course. So, you know, as you go through your course syllabi at the beginning of the semester, really slowing that down, going over the clear expectations of what students are going to be expected to do, how they will submit assignments. I can't tell you the number of students that we have come into academic coaching saying, I just don't understand how I submit that assignment on Blackboard. So being able to slow it down, really show them visuals, take the time to walk them through that. And then creating flexibility. Again, that goes with that tightrope scenario, but knowing that the variables are going to change. And then the last thing is that, you know, one thing we do hear from students often is we encourage them to go to office hours. And we regularly hear, I don't know what office hours are meant for, and I'm in a different time zone, and thus I'm not able, you know, the professor's office hours are at 4 in the morning my time. And so we are encouraging this shift towards student hours. They're still faculty office hours, but the framing of them is shifting it that these are your hours. These are student hours where you can come, we can talk. Here is a clear understanding of what the purpose of office hours, student hours are, and here are all the possibilities of how we can utilize this time together. So, I can promise you that staff around campus are encouraging students to use office hours, but being able to frame them as time with their professor and how they can utilize them really aids in that environment of inclusive design. And then the next slide is just, I wanted to share quickly 2 resources available to all faculty. These are available to students, and the academic coaching resources, any student can access these, but as you go through this website, you may want to utilize some of these tools within your own class. So we have different time management calendars. We have how to utilize Zoom and Canvas. So this can be a great resource. And then the next website is it's a help.american.edu/LSS, which stands for Learning Support Services. There's both a faculty page and a student page. So the faculty page, you're going to see on here best practices, tools for both Zoom and Canvas. And then we also will be adding in a large number of academic support strategies and assessments for students. I will put these URLs in the chat, but wanted to make sure you all had access to these.
Thank you, Ashley. Very helpful resources. And since we're speaking about chat right now, what we would like for you all to do, participants, is to use the guiding question of how do you use UDL in your classroom in terms of the content and or the format of your classroom. And we're anticipating 4 to 5 people per group. If you could identify note taker for your group, and we will resume, we'll share out that information when we return it as a large group. It's actually not slide 12, I believe it's slide 14 now. So if we could go ahead and do that now, that would be fantastic.
Hi. I set a timer for our breakout rooms. So I'm just thinking about timing, Robin. I think we're okay. We're just we're a little
behind.
a little behind, but I think that's okay. I still think it's important to let people talk. I feel like we've been talking a lot. So
Yeah, and I think we can, you know, take a few responses. I think them talking to each other, and, you know, so maybe that's how we manage the time a bit.
yeah.
Just looking to see exactly what, so they will be back at what time, Sarah?
13 minutes. So 1:18.
1:18.
I can do math that quickly. Lindsay, are you going to bring them back?
Yeah, I'll bring them back as soon as you let me know, Sarah, where we're at. Well, I can just plan to bring them back at 1:18.
Okay. I'm just trying to, I'm thinking out loud. Sorry, I'll stop doing that for a second.
Oh, you're fine.
Lindsay, also, if you would give them at the 3-minute warning, so they can tie up their sentence before they all of a sudden get dragged back in. It's always an awkward feeling.
Is the share look okay to you guys? Is that fine? The sharing screen, it's all, you would
Oh,
tell.
yeah, it looks great.
Oh, yeah, your screen's fine.
Because I have both my monitors going and I'm never really sure what I'm really sharing.
That's dangerous, Sarah.
I know. It's been very embarrassing. But I wanted to keep the notes up separately.
Yeah, I have that's whenever you see my head go off to the side, I'm looking at my other computer for our notes. So I guess in the interest of time, so when the group, since we won't have time for all the groups to share, that's the part I was just thinking about in terms of, you know, just deciding how many, so that we're, you know, that we're still, we're not too off schedule in time. And Sarah, you're on mute.
Yeah, so we go till 1:45. So if we come back at 1:18, that gives us just over a half hour. So the original idea was for me to go through these next two slides. The UDL kind of constructs, and I'm on the fence about how much, if any, of that to do. I guess it's important to do. Robin, you're here with us. Is that important for us to spend time on? Whatever. What do you think?
So I think, yeah, I do think so. I think what we can do is just set a time by which we are going to just pivot to that, because I also think it's important just to kind of, since that's sort of the foundational part of this workshop, to just cover or just remind folks, because we've done a lot of setup to get here. Yeah. Including this breakout session, which is soliciting, you know, how they're using it. But if we don't actually do the thing.
Yeah.
So I think so when they come back, I think they're coming back at 18. So I think maybe, let's see, 18, 28. So, and still we have the other two. So maybe we take about 5 minutes or so, because 5 minutes is still a long time in the virtual world. So of having some folks share, and I'll just ask for folks to pop in and use their voice and share with us a little bit about what their group discussed.
Okay. And we'll get everybody to put them in the chats though. So
Mhm,
Lindsay,
yeah.
how many groups did we end up with? I'm sorry, Lindsay, to keep bothering you.
No, you're fine. We ended up with 1, 2, 3, 4. We ended up with 4 groups, and we have a third group, but it's just us.
Okay.
So
Okay.
Oh, are we group 3?
yeah, you're group 3.
Okay, see, I didn't even know. I was like, nope, later.
Oh yeah, you're good. I tried to put all the presenters in one group so that we could all just ignore it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, who's gonna cover the Canvas course checklist?
So Alita and I put this in here, and it's a link. I wonder if it'll work. Actually, I should probably test that.
Because we might need to put that in the chat. Let's see.
Yeah, it works. But I can put the link in the chat. Yeah. Can you now see the checklist?
Yep, can see it. It's kind of tiny. I don't know if you could do hit the magnifier to make it a little bit bigger. The one down below at the bottom of the page.
I love that one. I think the big guy.
Mm-hmm.
Too big.
Yep. Now we
Okay.
can see that.
Okay. All right, but I copied the URL so I can send it to people. And we got it in our inbox from
And Provost.
yeah, from Provost Joe. I like to call him Provost Joe. I don't know if he knows that. Joseph. You know, the idea there was to sort of talk about, because what that has is it has a couple of different UDL pieces in it, we thought. So it sort of, you know, had some elements of UDL sort of already broken down. So just to kind of say, like, here's things across the UDL guidelines. But then we also, we sort of commented that these are all sort of at the top of the, you know, the axis. You know, if you look back here on this slide, they're all sort of up here, 3 point, you know, at the ones, and the more challenging things are the ones down here to do, right? Like this sort of these more complicated sort of levels of how you get students to internalize, like, you know, some rough self-regulation, executive function type things, or, you know, really motivation and choice. Like, so that's one of the things we were trying to talk through is, you know.
Yeah, I really think that that the way you frame that, Sarah, I think it's probably a good way to utilize this and to focus on that, the hard part, the you know, the sort of that bottom tier that folks might struggle to get to, or probably would appreciate some conversation around as you're going through your, you know, doing the framing and kind of just making it very, what's the word I'm looking for? Just addressing the tough stuff. So when they get there, there's a, you know, there's a sense of like, okay, Sarah addressed this.
I don't know if that's what they'll get, but we'll try.
At least a conversation. I think that's the piece, I think, especially as we come towards the end, that we want to stress is, you know, all of this is not going to be neat and clean, as we talked about, like with the tightrope metaphor, is that it is going to, you know, it is going to take conversations with colleagues and thought partnership and navigating resources to really find what fits well for you in your classroom and your students.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And I think also the final, the thing we didn't talk about is something the students talked about that I thought they said so eloquently in the student panel. They talked about all this complicated stuff, and in the end, what they said is the thing that supports them most is when they have a relationship with their faculty, because they can, it's like the container, and that's how we kind of describe it in CDI, because they used it because it's a CDI metaphor when we talk about inclusive communities, like how do we build them? You build relationships, and that relationship holds all the tough stuff that we have to do. And the students talk, they use the same metaphor to say, like, if something is not going well, if I have a relationship with my faculty, then I tell them what it is. I'm not afraid to tell them what it is. And so I tell those faculty who I have relationships with, but the ones I don't, I struggle more, and subsequently the faculty will struggle with me also as we don't actually deal with the tough stuff, because I don't feel like I can tell you because I don't have a relationship with you. And it's not a relationship around like, oh, this faculty member is my buds, but it's a relationship that you've taken the time to develop and understand who I am in all the ways that we've talked about today.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's to me, that's the big goal of, I guess that's the like opportunity we have if we're trying to sort of disrupt how we normally teach, is if we make it much more relationship centered.
Yeah.
Then we have this opportunity to sort of really kind of dig into what we're teaching. So
yeah, and I think it'll hold, especially the things that are uncertain, in ways that we'll have to pivot, unforeseen things, you know. I think relationships, you know, hold all that, and relationships hold vulnerability, and that's the thing we were talking about. Lindsay, will you give me a thumbs up when we have everyone back in?
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you.
So let me just, I hope you enjoyed your time in the breakout rooms. Just as a overall UDL principle, it's always important to spend time in the breakout spaces with something purposeful to do. If you have the opportunity to have co-facilitators in the spaces, it's fantastic. But obviously that's not realistic. So it's important just to have pretty structured time. And you know, one thing, this is a very basic thing, but just make sure you set a timer, because sometimes you can sort of get lost in your own group. So we try to be really purposeful about, you know, timer for 15 minutes for your time. You just spent some time with your groups, and you just spent some energy around thinking of what is UDL, and particularly what was sort of both the format and content of UDL. But before we share out, we just wanted to give just a little bit more of a groundwork in terms of what is UDL. And again, most of the folks here know all too well what UDL is, and it could give this talk, you know, much better than I can, but I will just kind of give us a little bit of our framework here, and thinking about universal design for learning, not only being about what, you know, the content of what we teach, but also how we create environments, how we set up spaces that provide opportunities for students to not only engage in actions, but also express their knowledge, but also sort of the why of learning. And that's that sort of engagement, offering multiple means of opportunities for engagement that attend to all the identities that students bring with them into the classroom. So I wanted to just provide the overall framework. We will include in our links in the session some of the guidelines materials, but again, wanted to give you that overall format that we understand UDL. And if you haven't seen these particular slides before, understanding that we're really focused here on the fact that neuroplasticity never goes away. We always have the opportunity to change our minds and change our brains, to really, because of the environment, because of the experiences we have. And we've really done that this year with the situations that we're all challenging ourselves with and trying to grow in. And we have opportunities to do that every day in our classrooms. So another part of the UDL framework, if we think about these sort of why, what, and how, if we dig a little deeper into the framework, we can see the sort of ways in which we can do some of these things. And we're going to talk a little bit about an email we all got from Vice Provost and Dean for Online Learning, Joseph, who gave us some tools in how in Canvas we can do some of this work. But we wanted to sort of share these breakdowns of not only how to look at the framework, but also, and again, you've just been talking about UDL, but how to think about how is it that we do across the board, try to challenge ourselves in each of these 9 areas. And we have, sort of what I would say sort of groundwork, like multiple, in this third line down where we said multiple means of expression and communication, obviously multimedia and multiple tools, But at a challenging level, like how do we actually push our students to tell us more and express more of themselves? So if you think about each of these boxes as levels within them in terms of how we can create opportunities for challenge and challenging ourselves, it's powerful to kind of think about moving deeper into the ways in which we can help students use these online experiences to continue to either bolster or transform their perspectives. So what we're going to do now is we're going to turn it back over to you all to talk a little bit about your UDL experiences. So if you would, again, those of you who were designated note takers, if you can share in the chat space, maybe a couple of you could share your responses to our prompt, and that was how do you use UDL in your classroom in terms of content and or format. So if those of you who were in the sort of designated taker role could pop some of those in there. We'll share and get some feedback from each of you on how you're doing these things.
So shall we go ahead and grab some voices?
Sure, we can absolutely, if people are more comfortable sharing voices rather than typing.
Well, I was suggesting we do both. So for folks who are typing in chat, and then for folks who would love to bring their voice into the conversation, just unmute yourself and kind of share any kind of learning or interesting takeaways from your group.
So we've got a couple of options, and I'll just read them. Alita and Robin, if you want to respond to. Brenda has some bullets I see first of all here, including a survey at the beginning of the semester to assess potential concerns, technical issues, time zones. Do you two want to respond to just that first one?
Sure. So certainly I think surveys are a great tool. And we mentioned it a little earlier that it's certainly a great beginning. One of the things that I will say about surveys and in the times that I've used them quite a bit in the courses that I've taught, is that the survey really should be the kind of survey that elicits a two-way relationship building and interaction. So it should be a very thoughtful survey. And I've seen some that are really, really great as resources here on campus, and I've seen some that are not so great and that are very transactional and almost like the kinds of surveys that we take or that we avoid in our inboxes, So I think the survey as a tool itself, I think is fantastic. And I think the thing that has to accompany that is really the design and does it elicit that kind of relationship that we want to build with the students individually and collectively, and then how do we plan to integrate that data with our student community, and then utilize it to really revamp as our tightrope analogy to either loosen or tighten aspects of the course. Ellie, do you want to jump in there?
I would, yeah, thank you, Robin. And Brenda, thank you for this point. I think when I think of ways to self-assess, giving our students to either assess the course, give us feedback, I think it also ties to the UDL principle of engagement. So this idea of sort of the sustaining, the motivating, the being able to check in with themselves about how they're engaging with the content and also engaging with us about the content. So really opening up that that communication channel, and that can be, I think, a nice aspect of survey or self-assessment, is that it provides different modalities. So it isn't necessarily the student having to come to your office hours or the student having to write you an email, but it could be a way for a student to check in on how they're doing and what's working, what's not working, and to give you that feedback in real time so that you can adjust. And so I think in that way, I think it really addresses the affective network the why or the engagement aspect of UDL. I also saw in Brenda's chat the flexibility of submission format, and I think it refers to I'm not sure. Does it when you say submission format is like PDF, Word doc, or is it something like auditory?
Yeah, so for kind of, hi, this is our group that was talking about it. We were kind of thinking about, yeah, if we can all have one, if the faculty kind of decides what is the goal of the assignment, well, if it can be answered in different formats, like whether it's they can record a video versus if they're more comfortable in a written response versus, a live presentation, those kind of, if it's inherent, and we're concerned about making sure it's fair to all students, that the assessments are equal. And so that was kind of the line we were talking about.
I think that's great. This summer, as many of you probably know, we bring students, theoretically, it used to be to campus, but they start their academic year early through the summer transition enrichment program. And we had a student who did just that, who was given an assignment, and the faculty gave them that kind of leeway and that freedom. And the products were fantastic because the students, and it was around the tell me who you are kind of thing, so along the same line as survey. And the student, in fact, not only made a video, but made a video of 3 aspects of his personality. And all 3 of them were talking to each other about talking to the faculty and telling them and the class about who the student was. The creativity was mind-blowing, and it accomplished the goal. So yeah, I love that, Brenda.
I noticed, Lita and Robin, Alicia has this point about live Google Doc class notes with rotating student scribes signing up for time together. I wonder if one of you might want to touch base on kind of the richness of what she's suggesting here.
I'm happy for one of my breakout room pals to add anything in here, but I think we had a kind of robust conversation about this as in different ways, and particularly potentially having a student be the note taker, and having a Google Doc that maybe is continuing throughout the course, that at the beginning of the semester, maybe even you assign or have people pick which days that they're going to take that over. And essentially then each class, somebody is taking the notes for the class, or potentially even the instructor could take the notes for the class on this document too. But in the way that in a live session, you might have done that on the whiteboard previously. But we thought that this could increase engagement in a lot of ways, get you to know other students and some of their strengths, like who's the good note taker in the class, and help you kind of think about which people you might want to partner with for various reasons and things like that. Oh yeah, thank you for that point about Google Docs not being available in China. So that's something to consider for sure too. Anything I'm missing from my group?
I had the pleasure of being in the group, and I just wanted to mention that we were thinking about it as a way for everyone to have sort of see into the course in terms of the record as a running record, and to add their voices. So if they had, they may or may not be able to contribute in real time. They may be busy, they're students for whom just listening and watching is what they can take in, and maybe they have to go back afterwards and reread. But just the opportunity to be engaging in the information afterwards, or asynchronously as well as synchronously, is a really, I think is a really powerful technique. And also being able to retain their own voice. So you can set up the Google Docs so that people can, if they had a clarification of a point they made or something further that they've been thinking about, they could add on to it.
Yeah, I'll just add in too. I think it's a really powerful approach. I think it'll be important not to require it of all students if that's the decision made. But I think for those that do really enjoy note taking, that really feel comfortable with the pace and the speed that an instructor is teaching, and they can keep up with the notes. I think it can be really powerful. Something that we're hearing from a lot of students, especially our incoming freshmen, is just this nervousness around, like, how do I create community in my class? Like, how will I know who my classmates are and who I can study with? And so I think that the common notes really creates that ability to get to know one another through a different lens. And you know, and we always tell students that note taking is the beginning of your study guide. And so there might be a neat way to build off of the notes and how students can come together to create their own study guide versus the faculty giving them a study guide, if you will. So I think there's a great opportunity for community through an approach like that.
Yeah, and a little one small thing that I would add is if the faculty member can make comments, you know, particularly because students are taking notes, especially, I think it creates a greater sense of community also because you're participating in that discussion with them as they're evolving and they're expanding their learning and their thought process to say, you know, this right here or consider this. And I think it's another way to have that kind of that connection and that ongoing conversation around the content.
I'll say one more thing, and to clarify, I think is a good thing, because we have times where a student takes the most beautiful notes in the world, but they totally miss the mark on what the professor was teaching. So I think there's that other side of it where y'all can really clarify for them something that they misunderstood.
Yep.
We have a question in the quote just to talk about a couple of things. One was just talking about uploading recorded lectures, and Cynthia asked, can the panelists discuss some issues with uploading recorded lectures? I also am responding directly to the question about helpful versus unhelpful survey questions. Oh, sorry, that was to Brenda, not Erin, but actually, can someone in the group talk a little bit about uploading recorded lectures? Thoughts on that and how to do that? Or what the challenges are with doing
that? Robin, would you like to go or would you like me to start?
You can start.
Okay, I can speak from some experience. So in the spring, in March, my position was to record everything. Mostly because of the variability of my students' availability given all of the different things going on. And so that was really I wanted to make it the course content and the live sessions as accessible as I could. And that was my motivation. One of my colleagues mentioned to me that he does not record for the reason that students feel not safe when it's recorded. So that, and he himself shared that point, that he doesn't necessarily feel safe that his lectures and his real-time teaching gets recorded. And so I think at a very general level, those are the kinds of the two dichotomies that I was faced with in the spring. I chose to set up my norms with my students, knowing that it was recorded, knowing, you know, putting our norms in place. And also, I also did something, this goes to the previous points about building community. I found that students were reaching out to me saying that they actually missed the time before class started. So I don't know if your students do this too, but a lot of my students would get to my class 15, 20, even 30 minutes before class, and they would just hang out in the classroom before class started. And when that was taken away, they really needed a space to just be together and to talk. And so I opened my classroom, my Zoom classroom up early and let them come in early and just talk, you know, commune. It wasn't anything that I just facilitated by way of Zoom, but obviously that was not recorded. So I think that I think giving people opportunities to connect is an important part of whether it, you know, of taking away this issue of whether it's recorded, not recorded, as long as we're setting up the norms in our classroom spaces with live sessions.
Yeah, I would agree. I would ditto that. So I think I was a bit of a hybrid last spring, especially because we, you know, given the unexpected transition, there were certain aspects of my course that I didn't record, especially if it was a part that required or that the students, I knew they would be vulnerable in. I used a lot of restorative justice practices and questions and framing in certain aspects of my course last semester. And so, or in the spring semester. And so in those moments, I didn't record the students because it just really would detract from them having that kind of space. And I don't know necessarily that watching their colleagues be vulnerable and not participating added the kind of value that the exercise was designed to do. But if it was, course content that I was lecturing about, then I usually would record those for students. So I think it definitely will, the faculty have to decide sort of, the intellectual property pieces and the concerns there. I think it's a conversation, to be honest. I think it's a conversation with each other, and it's a conversation with others to decide what makes sense in terms of creating more inclusion for students. I don't think it's a or, I just think it's an and I think it's one of those things that depending upon your course and depending upon your field of study and your research, how you might do that and what ways it might be appropriate.
Just one last thing, I would just sort of jump in on both those items. First of all, note-taking and also recording. I absolutely appreciate the privacy issues and the concerns that students might have about, having a recorded video of themselves. And I think those various concerns. I do think from a research perspective, my own work looks at reducing cognitive load of students with disabilities when they are in a learning environment, and not having to worry about taking notes, and knowing that you can go back and either re-listen to or read somebody else's notes is a powerful tool. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there as an option, as to kind of that other side of the fence. And obviously you don't want to record private conversations. While we were in the group sessions, Robin and I were recorded, and we trust that CTRL will edit those out. But the point is that, there are some really beneficial pieces to reducing that stress of having to take notes and look at the screen and look at all these other things. So that's a benefit for all students, but particularly for students with learning disabilities. So we have just about 5 minutes left. We did as much as we possibly could to overplan. So we will share with you our slide deck, or share it with UDL. Sorry, UDL, CTRL. We do have, hopefully this says time permitting. Does that say that on the screen? Give me a thumbs up if you're seeing that. Yay, thank you. So we did want to share with you in the notes for this slide, we have a couple of examples of students from the National Center for Learning Disabilities Youth Advocacy Group. They're just really great videos if you want to hear sort of students advocating for the types of learners they feel like they are and what they can bring into the school environment. So we'll share those with you. And then just as a point, I think if you've heard Provost Starr talk about the fact that AU was sort of determined to be a school that might thrive on the other side of the racial challenge, or racial reckoning that we're going through in the pandemic that we're being challenged by, AU has opportunity to thrive. And so some of that work here that the researcher out of NYU, SUNY, I cannot remember, maybe it's NYU, talked about, it might be interesting for you to take a look at some of those notes there. But we felt like this was an opportunity for us to really kind of get more faculty to adopt UDL principles, to really turn what we're doing in higher education maybe on its head, and maybe really position ourselves, because of our scholar teacher stance, to really benefit from that. obviously we don't want to leave you without thinking about taking care of yourselves. So I'll turn this over to my panel's colleagues just to touch base on that particular item real quick.
So I think, we've all heard sort of the metaphor, put your mask on first, and take care of yourself so that you can take care of others. And I think it goes without saying that it's important for us as instructors to just, really take care of ourselves and have that sense of self-reflection and support systems, so that we can have classrooms be a place where students feel challenged and not unsafe. And there is a difference. And I think sometimes that gets a little convoluted at times, and so I think what we really want to kind of stress here is take care of yourselves, create those systems. And the last piece I'll add there as we start to close is a conversation that Sarah and I were having. One of the things that in CDI and that the student panel mentioned that we had earlier this week is around this piece around relationship and relationship building. And I saw some questions or comments in the chat around the surveys and to what end and some of these other pieces. I think the critical part, and sometimes what I think is sort of what I know is the foundation or the container for this, is that we're building, all of this is towards building a more inclusive classroom, a more innovative classroom, a classroom where all of our students are thriving, and relationship is key to that. The students talked a lot about all the things that could go wrong or did go wrong, but for the faculty members that they had strong relationships with that were around that continuum that we looked at, they were able to navigate those difficult times a little bit easier versus the ones they didn't have relationships with and were more transactional. So, in the end, we just want to say, as a campus community, we have to take care of ourselves. We're particularly telling you all as faculty today to take good care of yourself, and that it will be, we know that the fall will have some turbulent times, but we also know there will be some great, wonderful times and peaks and valleys all the way. And the care for oneself will really allow us to have the capacity to manage those times. So thank you for being with us today. I don't know if any of my colleagues had some final last words of sorts.
Yeah, so just again, thanks to all of you for joining us today, for your voices in the chat. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of those. We certainly as wanted to model some of the UDL work in terms of offering these different opportunities, but I don't think we followed through as much as we wanted to in terms of the pieces. But we do really appreciate your time. We really look forward to continuing this conversation. I think one of the things that we all walked away with is just, this is not just a one-time thing. We need to continue to have conversations about how we support each other. So I encourage you, if you're not the type of person who generally goes to CTRL or your faculty workshops during the year, make this the year to do it, because you really do need that sense of community. And again, your being here today was truly part of that. Encourage your colleagues to do that as well. I'll hand it off.
Certainly feel free to reach out to any one of us, for more support, guidance, resources. We have some great surveys in CDI, so certainly reach out to us there as well, because it also, we've spent some time with it around the inclusion pieces and how do we integrate those well.
I just want to echo my colleagues. Thanks to everyone for being here. I think that I learn more from everyone than I can contribute. So I really appreciate the opportunity to engage in these discussions. And I just shared my email. Please feel free to reach out anytime. I think that the more that we can continue the discussions and our approaches, I think the more robust our community will continue to get. So thanks again.